Good evening and welcome to the Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights and JTeach.ca webinar on Israel's legal rights. I'm Corey Margulies, founder of JTeach.ca and co-chair of the CILR Education Committee. This evening, I will be joined by Goldie Steiner, founder and co-chair of CILR, Irving Weisdorf, co-chair of CILR, and behind the scenes by Agnes Imani, communications liaison of CILR, and founder of Jews Against Anti-Semitism Canada. We also have with us via video, Yehudi Shire-Weinberg, educator and writer, and Mark Vandermas, advisor and lecturer with CILR and Israel Land Rights Trainer of IsraelTruthWeek.org. Throughout our webinar, Agnes will be monitoring your questions, and time permitting, we will address some of those questions at the end of the evening. Any questions that we do not address will be used to compile a Q&A document which, along with some useful links related to our topic, will be shared on the CILR website. You know, life is a series of conflicts. At the moment of birth, we struggle to find our way into the world. We cry for attention or to be fed. We cry when we are cold or tired or frustrated. As babies, that's what we do. We cry. We eventually evolve into toddlers and children where our crying evolves to a whole other level. We cry and scream when we skin our knee. We throw tremendous tantrums when we are refused our bestest, most favorite cereal ever. And we hold hunger strikes when we're not allowed cake for dinner, at least until we're hungry again. Then we become adolescents or teens. This is the epitome of emotional reactions. Those of you with teenagers know exactly wherefore I speak. My life is over, or I hate you, are two of the hits on the emotional, hysterical teenager top 10 overreactions. The slamming door becomes a regular phenomenon in your household. A dark, grumbling cloud, starts to mysteriously float around your home, and if you squint your eyes just right, in the depth of the broodiness, you can see your teen. Eventually, we evolve. We become adults who are capable of reasoning. We learn to recognize our emotional states and to make decisions based on logic. At least that's the way it's supposed to work. The unfortunate truth is that there are all too many people who do not look at all sides of an argument before making a decision. They listen to what their friends say and they agree. They're swayed by politicians or famous people who jump on the bandwagon and repeat words they hear without investigating the veracity of these words. They allow others to make up their mind for them. This is why we teach media literacy and critical thinking in schools. How can we expect to raise the next leaders of our world if we continually bombard them with a barrage of emotional rhetoric based upon wants and desires? If we truly want what's best for our world, shouldn't we, at the very least, provide our future leaders with the facts on world issues so that they can make logical decisions? That is what we are here to give you today. Facts, evidence, a progressive, verifiable argument that traces the ownership of Israel to the Jewish people over thousands of years with a particular emphasis on the 20th century. This is not an emotional argument or appeal. This is not a political argument. It is a procedural argument addressing an undeniably complex issue that is documented by the international community. Let me repeat that since it bears repeating. All of the documents, meetings, and procedures referenced in the next 40 minutes or so come from the international community. They are not products of the Jewish people. All of the information that we will present has been compiled from Mr. Salomon Benzimra and is available in his book, The Jewish People's Rights to the Land of Israel. This is published by Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. The book is available on Amazon and from Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. You can find page references to the material in Mr. Benzimra's book at the bottom of each slide, and the slide deck will be made available shortly on both the CILR and the JTeach.ca websites, along with a recording of this webinar. Today, we will explore some of the documents and processes that clearly establish that the world purposely and legally established the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel. For those of you keeping track, here's the agenda for this evening. We're going to have opening remarks, and then we're going to have an overview of the topic. We'll look specifically at the Balfour Declaration, the San Remo Conference, the Mandate for Palestine. We'll sum everything up, and we'll have concluding remarks. And now, please welcome the founder and co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Goldie Steiner, for opening remarks.
Welcome to this special webinar, which is the virtual inauguration of our education committee formed despite the odds of social distancing. We came together as a group of 10 high-level educators, consultants, and dynamic activists, and look forward to a lively L'chaim celebration as soon as we can, as we hope to continue our work going forward. First, I would like to pay tribute to two giants who brought world attention to Israel's legal rights, Howard Grief and Salomon Benzimra. Howard Grief, whom I had the honor of meeting shortly before his passing, was the principal inspiration for Salomon, whom I had the privilege and pleasure to count as my soulmate and partner in the work we set out to pursue together. A few words about our organization. In 2009, 11 years ago, Salomon and I met, and soon after discovering our common love for Israel and Solomon's genius and penchant for the Arab-Israel conflict, he set out to write the book, The Jewish People's Rights to the Land of Israel. This is the book. I don't know if you can see it on screen. Corey already gave you reference the book. The book is a condensed, documented summary of Israel's legal rights, which by now became a world-renowned tool utilized to educate about Israel's historical, biblical, and legal rights, asserting that Jews are indigenous to Israel. Our mission is to educate students, Jewish, non-Jewish, at all levels all over the world, about the facts in defense against the towering lies about occupation and other myths, the bedrock of today's rampant anti-Semitism. After Solomon's tragic passing, as luck had it, Irving Weisdorf joined CILR as co-chair, whom you will be meeting at the end of this webinar. And now I would like to clarify why we call this a teacher's seminar. We believe that educators have the singular power to shape the minds of students who are as yet uncontaminated. They are the electorate and leaders of the future, who in turn will inform their elders of the truths and facts they will learn in their schools. CILR is a proactive organization. As such, at present, we are working in partnership with Im Tirtzu, Israel's foremost Zionist organization, to create a Knesset caucus with two objectives: to incorporate into the official curriculum the book, The Jewish People's Rights to the Land of Israel, and to declare April 25th each year as Yom San Remo, thus, albeit tacitly, declaring official recognition to our rights to the land from the river to the sea. The road ahead is long, with much to do. We hope that all of you will take away a deeper understanding of the role you play in preparing students to stand up against the challenges of campus and strengthening their resolve to take on the task of shaping the world, making it a better place, Tikkun Olam. quoting US Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who said, being fluent in Judaism, and I add here, being fluent in Israel's legal rights is an imperative for the future of the Jewish people, especially outside the state of Israel. And now I will introduce you Cory Margolis, our Education Committee co-chair and our newly forged partner. I could say legends about him, but because of time constraints, I will limit myself to say only 4 things. He served in the IDF. He's very connected to the Jewish community. He runs JTeach.ca and is summer school principal of Torah High. For more, you can find out by visiting his website. Cory, back to you.
Thank you, Goldie. Thank you so much for those heartfelt words. Let's begin with an overview of the origins of Israel's legal rights. You'll note that there are 3 highlighted areas. Those areas are the 3 documents that we're going to focus on this evening. So these are very important parts of the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel, but rest assured, the rest are certainly important, and there will be mention of them, but these are the 3 specific documents that we're going to look at. So in the first point, Jewish settlers lived in Israel from 1200 BCE to 70 CE, until the destruction of the Second Holy Temple and their expulsion by the Romans. This is when the region was renamed Palestine. The Emperor Hadrian of the Romans actually changed the name to Palestine in an attempt to erase Jewish connection to the land. Before that, we had the lands of Judea, the lands of Samaria, and familiar names to those who are familiar with the Bible. 18 centuries of dispersion followed by the emergence of a political movement of modern Jewish nationalism known as Zionism. Theodor Herzl, after the show trial of Captain Alfred Dreyfus in Paris, realized that the French Revolution, which gave more rights to the Jewish people, did not erase anti-Semitism in Europe. Therefore, he started the Zionist movement. At the first Zionist Congress in August of 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, Herzl and his associates actually formulated a program leading to the rebirth of the Jewish state in the region known to the world as Palestine. Herzl and his colleagues refrained from using the term Jewish state, as at that time, Palestine was in the area controlled by the Ottoman Empire. The Balfour Declaration, which we're going to look at in more detail, openly expresses the intent of Britain to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This declaration was shared with the Zionist Federation through Lord Lionel Rothschild. Prior to the end of World War I, the US President Woodrow Wilson would make his 14-point speech, which actually led to the creation of the League of Nations. The Paris Peace Conference in 1919 actually introduced the establishment of mandates. These were great powers charged with disposition of territories formerly held by the Ottoman Empire. They were people who were established, economically stable countries that were given the task not of running the territories, but of actually taking care of the transition from their power to the power of the people who lived there. In April 1920, the San Remo Resolution awards Britain the mandate for Palestine, and it established Palestine as a legal entity under international law to become exclusively the national home for the Jewish people. The borders for Palestine were settled by the Franco-British Boundary Convention in 1920. The mandate for Palestine, submitted to and accepted by the 52-member League of Nations, reduced Palestine to the western part of the Jordan River. From 1922, the British strayed from the agreed-upon borders for the Jewish home. The British counter to the Mandate for Palestine, transferred the Golan Heights to the French-mandated area of Syria. They also separated any part of Palestine east of the Jordan River and withheld any rights of Jewish settlement there in contravention of Article 6 of the Mandate for Palestine. The British did this in part to appease Emir Abdullah of the Hejaz out of fear of engaging him in battle. This is what creates the region known as Transjordan. The British also moved King Faisal from Damascus to Baghdad, where he became the king of Iraq. The United States, not a member of the League of Nations, entered into a treaty with Britain in 1924. This was the Anglo-American Convention, which recognized the mandate word by word. Actually, the US Constitution's Article 6 recognizes any treaty made as the supreme law of the land. The aforementioned documents, the Balfour Declaration, the San Remo Conference, the Mandate for Palestine, they've never been revoked. They're part of international law, and as such, they should be central in any discussion of the Middle East conflict. The acquired rights of the Jewish people in the land of Israel are valid to this day. This is a copy of the letter sent to Lord Rosenthal from Lord Balfour, Lord Rothschild, I'm sorry, from Lord Balfour. This was the Balfour Declaration of 1917. So in 1917, Lord Arthur James Balfour issued a clear expression of support for a national home for the Jewish people of Palestine. This wasn't a law, this was a letter of intent. However, this document became international law 3 years later at the San Remo Conference. Anti-Zionists seek to delegitimize the Balfour Declaration. They cite 3 different reasons why it's not valid and why it doesn't offer Israel legal rights. The first claim is that there is a reference to a national Jewish home for the Jewish people. It does not say a Jewish state. Well, the drafters avoided the term state so as not to antagonize the British government. Cabinet meetings clearly record the Jewish state is envisioned by both the British and the French. The second claim is that the phrase in Palestine did not mean in all Palestine. In Palestine, the intent is clear as seen in later official text and Mandate for Palestine. Specifically, we see in Article 5 of the Mandate for Palestine, no Palestine territory shall be ceded to any foreign power. Again, no Palestine territory, all of Palestine. The third claim, the non-Jewish communities in Palestine, refers to the Arab people. Concern existed, particularly by the French, that there be continued respect for Catholics, Maronites, Copts, Anglican, Orthodox, Muslims, and others. These refer to individual rights, not collective rights of a people such as the Arab people. This is reinforced in the San Remo Resolution of April 1920. The original French text states, les différentes communautés religieuses, the different religious communities. Doesn't refer to a specific people, it refers to the protection of those religions to practice their religions. The Balfour Declaration also includes a provision to safeguard the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. This answered the concern that establishment of a Jewish state would curtail the rights of Jews living elsewhere in the world. This brings us to the next portion, the San Remo Conference. We're going to listen now to Yehudit Shire Weinberg, who is an educator and shares with us the important significance of the San Remo Conference.
World War I finally came to an end. The old empires, including the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the Middle East for over 600 years, were defeated, and discussions began on what to do with the former territories of these empires. To understand the Middle East today and Israel's legal rights, one must learn about the San Remo Conference, April 1920. Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president of Israel, described the San Remo Conference as, "This is the most momentous political event in the whole history of our movement, and it is perhaps no exaggeration to say in the whole history of our people since the exile." What made it so significant? There was a new openness in international affairs advocated by US President Wilson. All secret agreements between the great powers regarding the disposition of the lands of the former Ottoman Empire were terminated. For the first time in over 1,800 years, the historical connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was recognized legally. A legal entity was created, and the Jewish people received exclusive national rights to the land. This was not an example of colonialism. There was recognition of the biblical boundaries of the Jewish kingdoms of Judah and Israel, and recognition of the centuries of massacres, expulsions, and persecutions of Jews in the land of Israel as recently as World War I, where in the 4 years beginning at the start of World War I, the Turks expelled and starved so many Jews that the Jewish community was reduced by half. Unfortunately, the legal entity that was established for the Jewish people was given the name Palestine, which was the name given to the land of Israel by the former Roman Emperor Hadrian in the year 136, to make people forget that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. This name was rejected by the Arabs until relatively recently. For example,
Oh, sorry, folks. I think we're having some technical difficulties here. We're going to try to fix that very quickly for you. And then hopefully that will resume. It seems that we are frozen. Seems that we're frozen on our broadcast. Okay, so what we're going to do then, try one more time.
Portion of Greater Syria.
There we go.
This name Palestine continues to haunt us. And although the Jewish people acquired legal sovereignty over the lands of the former Ottoman Empire in the Middle East were put under a mandate system. Great Britain was given the mandate for Palestine, as well as the mandate for Mesopotamia, which became Iraq. Britain was assigned a triple role as mandatory, to secure the establishment of Palestine as an independent state for the Jewish people, as trustee, to preserve the land in trust for the benefit of the Jewish people, and to be a guide to help the Jewish people on its road to independence. As you will note in the continuation of the course, the British totally betrayed the Jewish people in all three aspects. However, the principle of reconstituting the Jewish national home established in the San Remo Resolution became the key element of the Mandate for Palestine awarded to Britain, and its provisions, which include that Judea and Samaria, also called the West Bank, belong to the Jewish people and are still legally binding today. It is crucial for all to understand what happened at the San Remo Conference in order to understand the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel today.
Our thanks to you, Judith, for going over that with us. What we're going to do is take a look now at the San Remo Conference of 1920, and we're going to look at some of the legalities of that conference. We know that we had, going into San Remo Conference, looking at international law, we have the formation of the League of Nations following President Wilson's 14 points. Now, if we look here, we see that the League of Nations was formed, which involved 52 countries around the world. That's pretty significant. Here we have 52 different countries that are agreeing to get along, to make decisions together after World War I. And they're deciding on the allocation of territories. Essentially, a big portion of the reason they got together was to decide what they're going to do with those territories that were formerly controlled by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was essentially reduced to its Middle East holdings after World War I, and they decided that they were going to align with Germany, and unfortunately that did not, or fortunately for us, that didn't work out too well for them. So we have a collection of countries now who are trying to determine what happens from that point on. So really we had the big powers, and those big powers were Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, who were deciding what to do with these different countries. Now, this is where they came up with, under the San Remo Resolution, they decided that they were going to introduce the mandate system, which we'll go into a little bit more in a moment. San Remo Conference actually puts the Balfour Declaration into force, and this gives the Jewish people sovereign title on Palestine. Now, there were those who said that they were not allowed to, they say the UN doesn't enact law, it only suggests policy, but we're going to counter that argument as well. So I will mention something a little further on that actually addresses that. At the San Remo Conference, we have those 52 countries getting together, and we see how the distribution and the rights for mandate were given out to two different countries. So the Arabs actually were given equivalent rights in Syria and Mesopotamia as the Jews were in Palestine. The legitimacy of Arab states of Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, as well as Jordan, essentially, derived from the same international law. So those who argue that it wasn't legal for the formation of Israel and that the League of Nations didn't have the right to do so, have the other side of the argument where they say that in that case, neither was the formation of Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon. If one side can be created through the mandate process, then certainly Israel can actually undergo the same process and the same opportunity for creation. So the mandate for Palestine was actually confirmed by the Council of the League of Nations, and later on, it was unanimously approved by the 52 members of the League, unanimously, no opposition. So that just shows how much in agreement they were at the point in time. I mean, when's the last time you can say that any government body agreed on anything unanimously? So after that point, we come up with the Mandate for Palestine. So the Mandate for Palestine was actually terminated in 1948, but the formation and the actual process of the mandate is very important. When we look at the mandate, the first partition that took place, and somebody asked this question, the Mandate for Palestine was actually given over for all of Palestine and Transjordan to the British. Now, originally, there were territories to the west of the Jordan, or east of the Jordan River that was to be settled by the Jewish people, not just to the west. But the British changed this in 1922, looking to appease other governments. There's no specific mention in the Balfour Declaration of borders, but it does talk about from Dan to Beersheba. So these are two different locations, or these are two different areas in Israel that would delineate some borders and give us an idea of the extent of the mandate itself. So the League of Nations ceased to exist in 1946, and the UN became its successor. Now, when the UN came into being, there are those that argue, well, that this invalidates the Mandate for Palestine. How can we have a Mandate for Palestine if it was put together by the League of Nations, and the League of Nations no longer exists, the UN exists? However, Article 80 of the UN Charter actually refutes this. It says, nothing in this chapter shall be construed in or of itself to alter in any manner the rights of any states or any peoples, or the terms of international instruments to which members of the United Nations may respectively be parties. So what this is saying is that all of these members, all of these people, countries that became members of the United Nations, who were members of the League of Nations prior to the UN's formation, recognized the rights of Israel, the Jewish people, their rights to the land of Israel. When that happened, and when that was put into writing, and when there was an actual mandate, that is international law that still exists today. The UN's Article 80 says that they can't refute it, they can't change it, because it existed before and it was part of the member bodies. So that's an extremely important thing to note. So by maintaining the rights of any peoples, Article 80 of the UN Charter specifically maintains the rights conferred to the Jewish people under the mandate. So the mandate for Palestine expired with the proclamation of the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948. Keep in mind that the mandate for Palestine was essentially the world telling Britain that you're going to hold this land in trust. You're going to hold it for the people that we are going to designate as the rightful owners of this land. The world identified the Jewish people as the rightful owners of this land. So once once those people took over and the State of Israel came into being, there was no longer any need for a mandate. So the mandate was expired. But Article 80 is still relevant in that it prevents any action contemplated by the UN to alter existing Jewish rights and titles to any part of the land of Israel or Palestine. These rights are legally preserved under Article 80. So all of the arguments, again, that say that the mandate no longer exists, therefore they have no right to it, and the British didn't have any right to hand it over, there's a couple of things that we need to look at again. One, the world agreed that Britain did have the right to decide what happens with that area, with those territories. And two, the creation of many Arab states were as a result of the mandate system. If one is to argue that Israel should not exist because of the conditions by which it exists, then they must argue that the Arab states created under the same conditions should not exist as well. The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, adopted in 1969, establishes that acquired legal rights recognized in international law remain valid after the termination of a treaty. So if we look at the mandate for Palestine in the terminology of a treaty, once it ends, it still remains valid. This applies to the legal rights of the Jewish people, as they've been formulated in various documents since the San Remo Peace Conference in 1920. This is not a new document. This is something that exists in the international community and under international law since 1920. Some people will invoke the Vienna Convention in reference to the West Bank. This is erroneous. The West Bank is defined by the Green Line. This is a line, imaginary line drawn in 1949 as an armistice line, which ended the military hostilities. This was part of a peace process. This was part of an armistice. Armistice agreements cannot be considered treaties, especially considering when the Arabs themselves always opposed the adoption of the Green Line as a formal boundary. So one cannot argue that this is a formal boundary, this is a treaty boundary, when they don't even recognize that this is a border. They only recognize that the territory should belong to them, as should everything west of the Golan Heights, of the West Bank, east of the West Bank. So they argue that everything else should belong to them. They don't recognize the Green Line as a definitive border and boundary. Therefore, they can't claim that it was something that was drawn and handed over to the Arab countries as part of a treaty. All right, so the main summary, the main provision summary for the mandate for Palestine are as such. It stated that there was a Jewish national home in Palestine to be reconstituted based on recognition of the historical connection of Jews to the land. It recognized that the Jews have a significant attachment to the land. They have the significant settlement in the land of Israel. It goes back for centuries, and this was recognized in the mandate for Palestine. It states that Palestine territory is not to be ceded to any foreign power. However, the British did decide to hand over part of Israel to the French government, which meant that the West Bank was handed over to Syria. Jewish settlement was encouraged on the whole land. It states that right there in the mandate for Palestine, that the British were to encourage Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. There's a guarantee of civil and religious rights to non-Jews. That's what it means to be part of a Jewish nation. The Jewish nation, Israel, doesn't look to curtail anybody's freedom of a religion or their civic rights, despite what you might hear from certain zealous groups. Transjordan was actually carved out of Palestine, and restrictions were placed on settling east of the Jordan River to Jews. Now, again, this was in contravention to the original agreement that was made at the San Remo conference, but for reasons of their own, the British government had decided that they were going to change some of those resolutions or some of those agreements. It states that there can be no change of the mandate provisions without consent of the League Council. Since the League Council did not proclaim any changes and did not put anything into effect, there were no changes made, so it remains in force today. And the mandate itself has expired, but the Jewish people's rights remain. Remember, their Article 80 from the UN resolution states that a pre-existing agreement maintains. So we have some very historied proof of the rights of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So now we have the honor of sharing the insight of the mandate for Palestine from the founder of IsraelTruthWeek.org, an advisor and lecturer with Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Mark Vandermas.
Hi, Mark Vandermas here, founder of Israel Truth Week, advisor and lecturer for Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. I'd like to highlight the importance of Israel's modern but forgotten land title deed, the 1922 League of Nations mandate for Palestine, the original two-state solution. Number one, the very existence of the mandate proves, under international law, that Jews did not steal land. The whole document is about the world restoring the, quote, Jewish national home. The words Jews, Jewish, and Zionist are mentioned 14 times in just 11 pages. The world affirmed Jews as owners of all land west of the Jordan River, also their claim to land east of the Jordan River, land later given to the Arabs as part of the original two-state solution. Number two, the word God never appears in the mandate, but believers will see his fingerprints all over the pages because it is consistent with his promises to the Jewish people. The mandate and the Torah are in perfect sync. Number three, the mandate is a powerful tool to teach what is missing from Israel advocacy today, a moral argument that can be used tactically by you and me when we encounter the word occupation in our daily lives or online, or strategically by the state of Israel. We should remind the world that countless Jews died in the Holocaust because the Article 6 requirement to facilitate Jewish immigration was not honored. Shouldn't Jews be able to trust the world's promises? Why trust new promises and a new solution when Jews couldn't trust the promises in the original solution? Number four, the mandate means you don't have to argue ancient history, indigenousness, or archaeology. You just have to be able to ask, if I could show you a document of international law that proves Jews didn't steal land, would you read it? If so, here's the link. Number five, 98% of my trainees had never read the amazing words of the mandate for Palestine before meeting me. So my guess is that your children haven't read it either. If you teach the mandate to your kids, they can go to bed knowing that their people did not steal land from anyone. And how great is that? Finally, it doesn't matter what solution you favor. It doesn't matter how you feel about the Trump vision. If you don't want to lose more of your children to the hate, you need to destroy the occupation lie in their eyes and in the eyes of the world. And you can learn how to do just that via my Liberating Israel training program at IsraelTruthWeek.org. I build on the history taught by Salomon Benzimra in The Jewish People's Rights to the Land of Israel by showing you how to take control of the debate and to overcome objections. If you have any questions after you're done, I'd be glad to talk to you about them by phone or email. So many thanks to Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights and JTeach.ca for including my message of hope to you. And remember, Jews are owners, not occupiers. Bye. Hi.
I'd like to thank Mark for his wonderful comments. And now we're going to invite Irving Weisdorf, who is co-chair of CILR, to make some concluding remarks. And then we'll have a little bit of more comments. And then if we have time, we'll answer some questions. Irving, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Irving Weisdorf. As you heard, I'm the co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. As you know by now, having listened to Goldie's remarks, we are a proactive organization in the business of educating, particularly educating about Israel's legal rights, which exist. And if you know how they exist and why they exist and from where they exist, you will be able to answer questions, whether of your children or people you're speaking to. I want to personally thank all the Education Committee members for joining our efforts, certain that you will continue the work before you. And special thanks to Corey Margulies of JTeach.ca, whom I have not had the pleasure of meeting in person yet. But from what I see and what I'm told by Goldie, he is a wonderful addition as our co-chair of the CILR Education Committee. Thank you, Corey. We are delighted you are on board. We hope you all will join us again for our next broadcast on Thursday, June the 18th. That's this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for participating.
Thank you, Irving. All right, so before we actually get into the Q&A, I just want to make mention and thank all of the members of our, excuse me, all of the members of our CILR Education Committee and our consultants for all of the effort they put in to bringing this webinar alive. Their care and commitment to such an important issue is truly admirable. We hope that you've gained some insight into the matter of the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel in the manner in which it was intended. Logical, legal, and factual. But obviously, there's so much more to learn. Please be sure to join us for our next session on Thursday, June 18th from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. All of the registered participants from this session will be sent the login information. So you do not need to re-register. You will be sent the login information directly. For those who did not register for the webinar or who did not to attend part 2 on Thursday, June 18th, they can register at the following address at https://bit.ly/2ZUPCFS. That will also be posted on the CILR and the JTeach.ca website. So please look for that and be sure to join us. Before we get to the questions, I just want to make sure that I thank myself for messing up my PowerPoint. That I thank all of our committee members, but especially I want to thank Goldie, Irving, Agnes, Mark, and Yehudit for their contributions to making this come alive. We're going to actually join together with Agnes at this time, who has been monitoring your questions, and we're going to see if we can actually answer a few of the questions that you have. Hi, Agnes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. So it's time for our Q&A. My name is Agnes Simani. I'm the founder of Jews Against Anti-Semitism Canada. And I'm very glad to join this really important seminar to debunk the lies that surround Israel. Now we have a few great questions. Let's start off with Joseph Flashner. He asks, how do we defend Israel's legal rights in the international court arena?
So again, the defense really goes back to the Mandate for Palestine, and it really follows those arguments that people will make against the mandate. Particularly, as I mentioned before, that the original mandate was put into force and voted in by the League of Nations, and that since there's no more League of Nations, it's no longer valid. Once again, if you look at Article 80 of the UN, it states that any previous agreements made by member states of the UN remain valid and in force. Well, we know particularly that most of those countries, apart from those who no longer exist, belong to the UN, and which means that those agreements remain in force, which means the Mandate for Palestine, which cedes the land of Israel to the Jewish people, remains in existence and remains in force.
Thank you, Corey. Our second question, we have David Amkraut. He asks, Do the Oslo Accords reduce Israel's rights to Judea and Samaria?
Well, it's not as if anyone can just agree to take away existing legal documents. So I would say no. From a legal standpoint, you can't have somebody walk up to your house and say, I created a bill of sale for your home and now I own your home, even though you have documents showing that you own it. I mean, we know that there's precedents in law. I'm certainly not a lawyer or an expert in legal matters. However, we can't just erase a current existing document that shows the legal rights for people to reside in the land that they do reside in simply by creating something else. In order to create more information that would invalidate that, they would have to go through a legal process to actually remove that. And that has never been done. So the mandate for Palestine, the agreements at the San Remo conference, all of those are still in effect, and which means that they're still legal and valid according to the international community today.
Arlene Margulies asks, can you please explain how Trump's plan impacts the West Bank?
I would like to, but I have a, it's quite a question. Honestly, I think we're going to have to address that in a Q&A because I don't want to give any information that doesn't, that's incorrect. So I'm going to have to pass on that for the moment. We'll make sure we get an answer on that in the Q&A document, which is going to be available on the CILR website and the JTeach.ca website.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. How does the documentation of deeds showing real estate purchases of Jews purchasing land play into this?
Of Jews or Druze?
Of Jews, of not Jews, of Jews. So how does the documentation of deeds showing real estate purchases of Jews purchasing land play into this?
Well, a purchase of a land is a legal document which shows an ownership of a particular package of land that we purchase from the established owners. The Jews, the Jewish people, the state of Israel were designated by the international community as the legal owners of the land of Israel. So any contract entered into by any Jew of within the land of Israel would be a legal contract. It would be a purchase from a legal owner, just as if you were to buy a house from someone here in Canada who actually legally owns that home, or would buy a plot of land from a developer who legally owns the piece of property that they are selling you. It's not really that complicated an issue if you adhere to the legalities of the situation and the documents that precede most of these arguments.
Okay, last question. What success have you had, or what are your future plans in presenting these powerful arguments to non-Jews, especially decision-making politicians and leaders around the world?
I think for that, in that situation, I have to give a lot of credit to Mark Vandermaas, who for years has arranged Israel Truth Week and has spoken to groups, individuals and groups, who had no idea that the mandate for Palestine existed, and he educates them on Israel's land rights. I should also mention that Mark is not Jewish. Mark is a Christian. Mark is an individual who saw injustice, who saw discrimination, and decided that he didn't want to stand up for this. And that led him to learning more and more about the situation in Israel. So, you know, when I say that, when I say there's success, we are just starting out as an organization, CILR, with the exception of the phenomenal work that Mark has done with his own organization and in conjunction with CILR. We are just starting to push out the information to the general public. We haven't had a very hard time getting the information across to the Jewish community, but we want others to also realize that when we talk about Israel, you know, one of the things that we say is the Israeli government has the right to negotiate in any way they want for anything they want, but they should be doing it from a legal position. They should be doing this from a position of owners of the land, not of occupiers for the land. It puts a whole different narrative on the situation when they sit there and talk to them as if they are the legal possessors of the land of Israel. From that standpoint, any argument or negotiation they do is political, but the legality needs to be recognized. And this is what we're trying to do partly through this seminar and hoping to go forward. CILR is partnered with JTeach.ca in Israel, and there are schools in Israel. At the beginning of the webinar, you saw Goldie holding up the book, the Jewish people's rights to the land of Israel. But if you notice, the copy that she held out was actually in Hebrew. So that copy is actually distributed in Israel to people in Israel, and they get a chance to read this and they get a chance to understand it. Imagine the people who live in the country that's being discussed in this book not actually knowing that the mandate for Palestine exists, which is so important. So in educating the youth of today to go forward and talk about things from a legal, factual standpoint, it's critically important. As a matter of fact, it could erase a lot of the animosity and the violence that's occurring these days, because it puts the arguments, it puts the discussions on a whole different footing.
Corey, I have a very important question. How do we stop being on the offensive? It seems like we're always, on the defensive. It seems like we're always on the defensive. How do we get on the offensive? How do we, I feel like we're always trying to argue the fact that we do have a right to the land of Israel. How do we show our strength? How do we stop fighting for our rights?
So I think that
fight for their rights.
I think a big part of this is really what we are trying to do is we're trying to educate the younger generation. We need to teach those that are of the younger generation that they can't just listen to hate, they can't just listen to hearsay, they can't just listen to words that are being spoken by people who we know nothing about. They listen to their friends, they listen to people who are spouting rhetoric, they listen to people who are repeating information that are not fact. It's our job, our generation should be teaching that younger generation that you can't just listen to those facts. You need to look at and evaluate every situation. And in that, we have to be able to provide them with information. I think we're going to actually ask Goldie to chime in. She actually wants to contribute to the answer to this question. So I'm going to ask Goldie to join us. She will just need to start up her video again and her microphone. Here we are. Oh, you're still on mute, Goldie, sorry. There you are.
Okay, I appreciate that question. And as I mentioned in my introductory words, we are a proactive organization. Our aim is not just to present the problem, which we find, unfortunately, too many organizations, whatever their agenda, they talk about the problem. Very rarely do we hear solutions. So when I said we're working right now, we're doing a lot of work for the last 3 years with JTeach.ca. They are the boots on the ground who do carry out a lot of our programs. We've done many projects with them, but right now we're working on 2 things. One is the Knesset caucus, where we're asking the government of Israel to declare Yom San Remo, which is a tacit declaration and acknowledgement of the fact that we have legal rights, something that's never been declared by the government. Number 2, and this is in the making, we are publishing a book on the Levy report. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Levy report. It is a report that was commissioned by Netanyahu himself in 2012. The commission decided that the question was, are the territories legally belonging to Israel? The conclusion was that it is legal to Israel, and what happened? That report has been shoved under the carpet, and 99% of the Jewish people in Israel are not even aware of that decision. So we are right now, it's in the making, we are printing, I'm not sure, I don't want to say what quantity, a booklet with the levy report. It will be distributed to students, to the public in general, acquainting them with that decision, which is very important. So when you ask, we are not on the defensive, we are on the offensive, we are bringing information to the Israeli people and consequently to the diaspora about what people should know and how to stand up the calumny and the claims that we are not owners of the Israel. Another one of the plans in this next project is, which we call fighting anti-Semitism by educating to debunk the occupation lie. We are working on debunking the lie, not just presenting the problem and the claims. We want to debunk those lies. And I think Irving has an even larger plan in mind to continue this program. Right now, we are running it with Im Tirtzu, and culmination of this particular project is we want to erect a billboard, a large billboard in the main section of Tel Aviv, talking about the lies and how to defend ourselves against it. Not defend ourselves, but giving ideas and promoting certain ideas to debunk the lies, which is the crux of the problem.
Thank you, Goldie.
Did I answer the question?
I think you answered it very well.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're at 8 o'clock and I want to respect everybody's time. So I want to thank you once again for joining us this evening. Remember that our next broadcast, which focuses on the education aspect and delivering the education of the Mandate for Palestine to mostly high school students, but also the older elementary school kids, will take place this Thursday from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please join us. We'll see you there.